Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Having spoken about the nikah of the kuffar, we will now move on to talking about when one of the spouses has a defect in his or her body, which gives the other partner the choice to annul the marriage contract. These defects are of various types, and so the ulama have put them into categories. And you can divide them up into various types of categories. So for example, we could say that there are two categories of defects. The first category are those defects which hinder sexual intercourse between a husband and a wife. And these would be certain types of conditions in the genitalia of the man or the woman. Then the second type of defect would be that not pertaining to sexual intercourse, but rather some other type of illness which makes the spouse averse to his or her partner. This could be something like madness or leprosy, or some other serious contagious disease which makes one partner averse to the other. You could divide the defects up into another three categories. We can say category number one are those defects specifically pertaining to the male. So this would be, for example, if the male is castrated, then in this case the woman has a choice to annul the marriage contract because she will not be able to have any children with him, and having children is the right of the wife. Then we can have those defects which are pertaining to the female specifically, and this could be if the female genitalia is closed and it does not open, so the man finds it difficult to have intercourse with her, and other such defects which prevent or hinder a man from having intercourse with the wife. Then this would be a defect in the woman, hence giving the man the choice to annul the contract. And then we can have those defects which are shared by both the male and the female, and this could be something like leprosy or madness. As for Ibn al-Qayyim, he says that we don't even need to divide these defects up into categories. He simply says this: whatever makes the spouse averse to his or her partner, then that is a defect. Because the whole idea of marriage is that the husband and wife should live together peacefully and happily. So any defect which will prevent this happiness and this peace and tranquility between the husband and wife would be classed as a defect. So for example, blindness or deafness would also be classed as a defect, because this would hinder the man and the woman living together happily. Of course, it's perfectly possible to live happily with a spouse of yours who is deaf or blind. However, somebody may feel that this deafness or blindness is something which he's not looking for in a spouse, therefore this will hinder his happiness, and he has the right therefore to annul the contract. So for example, if the wali of the woman did not tell the husband that the woman is blind, for example, or that the woman is deaf, and the husband assumed that the woman is not blind, so she can see, and she's not deaf, because this is the asl, this is the original ruling. The original ruling is that the people are not blind or deaf unless otherwise stated. So he marries this woman assuming that she is of perfectly sound health in terms of her vision and her hearing. Then he finds out that in fact she's blind or she's deaf. He can choose to stay with her if that's what he wants. However, he may think that this will hinder his relationship and it makes him averse to the woman, so therefore this would be classed as a defect, and the wali of the woman would be at fault for not informing the man of this defect. So the man can actually take back the mahr from the wali of the woman if he gave the mahr to the woman. Or for example, a woman marries a man and then afterwards she realizes that this man is infertile, so he will not be able to have any children with her. She did not know about this when she agreed to marry the man, and so she realizes afterwards that he has this defect. So does she have the right to annul the marriage? We say yes, she definitely has the right to annul this marriage, because this is a defect which hinders the whole essence and spirit of marriage, and one of the purposes of marriage is having children. So anything which hinders that therefore is classified as a defect. Let's take this narration in this chapter. Hadith 876. وعن زيد بن كعب ابن عجرة عن أبيه رضي الله عنه قال تزوج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم العالية من بني غفار، فلما دخلت عليه ووضعت ثيابها رأى بكشحها بياضا، فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم البسي ثيابك، والحقي بأهلك وأمر لها بالصداق. رواه الحاكم وفي إسناده جميل بن زيد وهو مجهول، واختلف عليه في شيخه اختلافا كثيرا. From Zayd ibn Ka'b ibn Ujrah, from his father radiallahu anh, he says that the Prophet married a woman called Al-Aliya from the tribe of Ghifar. Then when she entered into privacy with him, and she took off the clothes, he saw on the side of her body some whiteness, and so the Prophet told her, "Put your clothes on and go back to your family." And the Prophet ordered that the mahr or the sadaq be given to her. This hadith is da'if. Hadith 877. وعن سعيد بن المسيب أن عمر ابن الخطاب رضي الله عنه قال: أيما رجل تزوج امرأة فدخل بها فوجدها برصاء أو مجنونة أو مجذومة فلها الصداق بمسيسه إياها وهو له على من غره منها. أخرجه سعيد بن منصور ومالك وابن أبي شيبة ورجاله ثقات. He says that Umar radiallahu anh says that any man who marries a woman and then he enters upon her in privacy and he finds her to be barsa, which is when you have a whiteness on the skin, and this is a form of illness or a defect, or he finds her to be mad, or he finds her to have judham, which is a disease, an infectious disease which eats away at your limbs. Then if he finds these types of defects, then he says that he needs to give her the sadaq, which is the mahr, because of him having intercourse with her, but he can take his money back from the wali of the woman who deceived him, because here the wali of the woman did not inform the man of these defects which the woman has. This hadith is actually a narration from Umar and not a narration from the Prophet, and the men in the chain of narration in this narration are all authentic narrators. And also in a narration of Sa'id ibn Mansur from Ali, who said that if the man finds the woman to have some swelling around the genitalia which will make it difficult to have intercourse with her, then in this case the man has a choice. He can keep her or he can annul the marriage contract. But if he had intercourse with her, then he has to give her the full mahr because of this man making her halal for himself. And in another version from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, he says that Umar radiallahu anh gave the judgment that the innin, this is the person who is impotent, so he is not able to have an erection, that this type of person should be given a delay for 1 year. So in other words, if his condition is not rectified in 1 year, then the woman has a choice to annul the contract. And the men in this chain are also authentic. So we find that these are narrations talking about defect in the spouse. So the point is, if a man is deceived and he finds a defect in the wife, then he can annul the marriage contract as soon as he sees the defect. One might say here, but if this is the case, then this will be a great calamity upon the woman, would it not, that she is being divorced because of a defect which is no fault of her own. True, if she was divorced because she is rude and insolent to the husband, then this is understandable. But as for a defect in the body, then this is not her fault. She did not choose this. We say yes, absolutely. It is not her fault at all, and she is suffering because of it. However, we simply say that these are one of those issues in life where you have to keep patient over. And when you keep patient over these types of afflictions, then they serve two benefits. Benefit number one, they expiate your sins. And this is something for which you will be thankful for on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And then secondly, if you are patient over these types of afflictions, then you will have an increase in reward. And this is also something you'll see the results of on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So in the end, it does turn out favorably for the one who has been afflicted. So it's never the case that a Muslim is afflicted without being repaid, or without these scales being balanced out. As for somebody who does not believe in the hereafter, and he does not believe in justice in the hereafter, then any calamity would basically be like the end of the world for him, because there's nothing beyond and above this worldly life. So any type of calamity would be the end of the world for this type of person. He does not have this concept of patience because he does not have faith in the hereafter and in the justice of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So any calamity or any atrocity is ever magnified in his eyes, and he lacks the ability to be patient over the calamity, as opposed to somebody who has firm faith in Allah Jalla wa Ala and he believes in the justice of the hereafter and that the scales are going to be balanced. When the Prophet tells her to put your clothes on and join your family, then what is this? Is this a divorce or is it an annulment of the marriage contract? We find in the narration that he orders that the mahar be given. So we could say that this could be a divorce, because when you divorce the woman, then you have to give her the mahar which you stipulated. And if this divorce is after entering into privacy with the woman, then she receives the full mahar. As for if it was before the privacy, then she receives half of the stipulated mahar. Or we could say that it is a simple annulment of the marriage and not an official divorce, because it could still be that the Prophet has annulled the marriage, but he orders that some gift be given to her just out of generosity. And this would be by way of compensation, because when a woman is divorced, then she does become dispirited to a certain extent. So it is good to give her a compensation. And we find from the statement of Umar that if he finds his wife to be defective, and he has given her the mahar, because he's entered into privacy with her, then he can take back the mahar from the wali of the woman if the wali of the woman knew about the defect and he concealed it from the husband. Otherwise, if the wali is not at fault, then the woman is at fault for not revealing the defect and informing the wali or the husband about it. So if this is the case, that the woman is responsible for deceiving the man, then the man does not have to give her the mahar, because even if he gives her the mahar, he has the right to take it back off her because of her deceiving him. So the point is that the man takes the mahar back from the one who deceived him. But we find from the narration that even if one of the spouse does have a defect, the actual marriage contract is still correct. So we don't say that one of the conditions of the marriage contract to be correct is that both of the parties must be free of defect. No, rather, this issue of defect simply gives the choice to one of the spouse to go ahead with the marriage contract, meaning to continue it or not. If the man decides to annul the marriage contract because of the defect before entering into privacy with her, then he does not have to give her the mahar, because an annulment of a marriage contract is not the same as a divorce. If he divorces her before entering into privacy, he has to give her half the mahar. As for if he annuls the marriage contract because of a defect, let's say, then he does not have to give her the mahar at all. If the woman annuls the marriage contract because the husband has a defect and they did not enter into privacy with each other, then again the woman deserves nothing, because an annulment of marriage is not the same as divorce. As for if he divorces or annuls the marriage contract after entering into privacy, then we say that the woman in all cases receives the full mahar. However, in the case of a defect, we can say that the man can go to the wali of the woman and take back his money, because the wali is the one who deceived this man by not informing him of the defect this woman had. And this is in accordance with what we have just mentioned from the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu. If the woman finds a defect in the husband and she annuls the marriage contract before they entered into privacy with each other, then who is to blame for this split up between them? Is the woman to blame because she is annulling the contract? Or is the man to blame because he deceived the woman by not informing her of the defect which he had? There's a difference of opinion on this issue. Some scholars say the woman is to blame because easily the woman can keep patient over this defect. And other scholars say no, the man is to blame, because the woman has every right to annul the marriage contract if she finds the defect. It is the man who should have informed her that he has a defect. For example, he is infertile. So this split up is actually because of the man. And if it is because of the man, then if they split up before entering into privacy with each other, then the woman does deserve half of the mahar, because the cause for this split up is the man. So it is as if the man, let's say, was to divorce the woman before entering into privacy with her, he would have to give her half of the mahar. We can look at this topic of defect in another way. We can say that a defect can be of two types. The first type is having an absence of the good qualities in character. So this is a type of defect. For example, good qualities could be somebody is beautiful, or somebody is generous, and other good qualities of a character or physical good qualities. So either you have them or you don't have them. So if it be the case that one of the spouse does not have these good qualities, then the other spouse does not have the right to annul the marriage contract. The second type of defect is when somebody has a negative quality, and this could be the type of things which we have been speaking about, for example, being impotent, or being infertile, or having some sort of contagious disease, or having leprosy, or the like. Then this is having a negative quality, and this is a type of defect which gives you the choice to go ahead with the marriage or to annul it. The first type of defect does not, unless you stipulate that this person should have this particular good quality about him or her. So for example, the man stipulates that the wife must be beautiful, or for example, the wife stipulates that this husband should be rich. So if this condition has been made and then she finds out that he does not have this good quality which she is looking for, then she has the choice or the right to annul the contract, otherwise she does not. So take notice of the difference between these two types of defects. As for the second type, which gives you the choice to annul the marriage contract, then the question becomes, what are these types of defects? Are they a limited number, or is there a particular way which we can tell that this is a defect and this is not a defect? Well, we simply say whatever the people or the customs of the people deem to be a defect which will result in marriage life being destroyed or disturbed, then this is the type of defect which gives you the right to annul the marriage contract. So we do have to look at the customs of the people, because if the Sharia does not give any details on a particular issue, then we look to the customs of the people to decide the matter. As for a man being impotent, so he's not able to have an erection, and this will obviously take away the wife's right, then the point is, how do we decide whether he is impotent? Do we simply go by the claim the woman is making that her husband is impotent, so she wants to annul the marriage contract? Well, the point is that the one who makes a claim needs to provide evidence. If the woman is going to make this claim, then we know that the asl is that the man is not impotent, unless you have evidence otherwise. So this claim requires evidence. Otherwise, we can say that if the man acknowledges that yes, he is impotent, then this is evidence enough. So if he acknowledges that yes, he is impotent, then as Umar radiallahu anh ruled that he should be given a time delay of 1 year, within which to see if he recovers or not. If he is able to have an erection and have intercourse with his wife during this year, the woman does not have the right to annul the marriage contract. If he's not able to have intercourse during this year, then she does have the right to annul the contract. And the reason why he's given a year is because in 1 year you have all the 4 seasons. So it could be that the season is affecting his sexual health. But then the question is, this ruling which Umar gave, is it a Shari'i ruling or is it a ruling out of his own ijtihad? You could argue that this is a ruling out of his own ijtihad, and so if this is the case, then every ruler will make his ijtihad and give an appropriate amount of time delay to the husband. It doesn't have to be a year, it might be less. Some might say that this is a hukum shar'i, so it's coming from the Sharia, and this is because they will say that a ruling of a Sahabi is an evidence in the Sharia in and of itself, just like the Quran and the Sunnah. And we say on this issue that there is a difference of opinion, but the statement of a Sahabi is an evidence based upon conditions. Condition number 1, that he is from the knowledgeable Sahaba, because otherwise there were many Sahaba of the Prophet, but not all of them are qualified to speak about Islam. Some Sahaba only met the Prophet for a short period of time, and there's no way they could have too much knowledge. But if this Sahabi is one of the knowledgeable ones, like Umar for example, then his statement can be taken as evidence. But also there's the other condition, that it must not go against the Quran and the Sunnah. And then we have the third condition, that it must not oppose a differing opinion of another knowledgeable Sahabi. Because if that's the case, then we would have to see which one of these two is upon the truth and holds the correct opinion. So if these conditions are met, then the statement of a Sahabi is an evidence in the Sharia. And in particular, the statement of Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma is an evidence. Out of all of the Sahaba, they are most worthy to have their statements as an evidence, because the Prophet ﷺ authentically said, اقتدوا بالذين من بعدي أبي بكر وعمر. Take your example from the ones after me, Abu Bakr and Umar. Likewise in the Sahih, he said, إن يطيعوا أبا بكر وعمر يرشدوا. If they, meaning the people, obey Abu Bakr and Umar, they will be rightly guided. Likewise in the Sahih, when a woman came to the Prophet asking a fatwa, the Prophet told her to come back to him, and she asked, but what if I don't find you? And the Prophet said, إِن لَمْ تَجِدِينِي فَأْتِي أَبَا بَكْرٍ. If you don't find me, then go to Abu Bakr, meaning go to him to seek the fatwa. But the point is, what's the difference then? Whether this is a hukum shar'i or a hukum qada'i, meaning a ruling given by a particular judge based on those people in those times in that place. We simply say that a hukum shar'i cannot be changed, whatever the conditions may be. As for a hukum qada'i, which is more specific to a certain time and place and people, then this can change due to the changing times and peoples and places. So for example, if a person has impotence nowadays, and the doctors tell us that his impotence is incurable, so whether you give him a leave of 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, his impotence will not be healed. We say, doesn't matter. We are still going to give him 1 year of respite to see if his impotence is healed, because this is a hukum shar'i, and it is not for us to oppose the hukum shar'i, regardless of what the doctors may say, because the doctors do not know more than Allah Jalla wa Ala. However, if it is a hukum qada'i, which is based upon somebody's ijtihad in a certain time and place, then we can say, okay, if the doctors are saying that his impotence will not return, then we can give the woman the choice to annul the marriage right here and now. There is no point in us giving him 1 year's respite. What about if it's the case that initially he's not impotent, but then he becomes impotent? Do we give the woman the choice to annul the contract? The answer is yes, we do give her the choice, because it's the same thing. She is losing out on her rights which belong to her. However, this issue of impotence nowadays can be rectified because there is medication available for such conditions. So we don't see this idea of impotence being a problem nowadays. What about if the woman knows that this man is impotent, but she still says that she is happy to be with him? If she expresses her contentment with this man and she is happy to be with him and does not want to annul the marriage contract, then in future she does not have the right to annul the marriage contract, because she has entered into this contract upon basira, or upon an insight. So it's not like she has been duped or the situation was out of her control. So we say in a case like this, it is not her right now to annul the contract. So for example, she's told that the man is impotent, but she says, no, but this man is also very kind-hearted and he's brave and he has many other good qualities, so I want to keep with him. We say, okay, fine, it's your choice, but you don't have the right to annul it. Now, in the future, if she wants to have intercourse, and this man is impotent, therefore he cannot give her what she wants, she does not have the right to annul the marriage contract. So in this then, there needs to be a lesson for everyone who enters into a contract knowing that the other party has a defect. So no one must ever think that the situation as it is now will always remain the same. No, rather, conditions of a people can change. So today she does not mind him being impotent, but in the future she will mind him being impotent because she wants to have intercourse. So this is something you need to bear in mind, that the conditions of a people can change. And in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, أحبب حبيبك هونا ما عسى أن يكون بغيضك يوما ما. Love your beloved person to a limited extent, meaning don't go too deep into loving him, because it could be that one day he would become somebody hated to you. وأبغض بغيضك هونا ما عسى أن يكون حبيبك يوما ما. and hate the one you hate to a limited extent, meaning don't go too deep into hating him, because it could be one day he becomes somebody beloved to you. So the point is that the conditions and affairs of people do change. So this needs to be taken into account when you enter into a marriage contract, and indeed when you deal with anybody. So we have said before that a defect are all those things which the community or the culture of the people deem to be a defect. The ulama have given examples of such defects, so let's take a few of these examples. What about if the man or a woman has incontinence, which is the continual flow of urine, or perhaps continual flow of feces? This appears to be a defect, and it will put the person off his or her spouse, so therefore we say he does have the right to annul the contract. What about istihada, when the woman continuously bleeds from the genitalia? And of course we have said that istihada is not the same as the menstrual blood. Well, according to the correct opinion, it is permissible for a man to have intercourse with his wife when she is in her istihada, or if she is in her istihada, because the istihada blood is not the same as the hayd blood, which is something we discussed in the kitab of Tahara. And from the ulama are those who say that it is not permissible to have intercourse with your wife if she's in a state of istihada, but the point is that istihada is not the same as hayd, so we do not give it the same ruling. However, even if we say it is permissible to have intercourse when she's in the istihada, it will still put the man off his wife, because he will be stained with blood. So, if he marries a woman and he finds out that she is in a state of istihada all the time, then he does have the right to annul the marriage contract based on this defect, because it will put him off his wife and it will interfere in him enjoying relationship with his wife. If the woman finds that her husband has his testicles chopped off, then this is certainly an aib or a defect, which gives her the right to annul the marriage contract, because she will not be able to have children, and having children is the right of every woman. If the man or the woman finds his or her spouse to be a hermaphrodite, then again this is a defect which will put the person off his spouse, and hence it will give him or her the right to annul the marriage contract if his or her spouse is a hermaphrodite. And we said before that it is not permissible to marry a hermaphrodite until it becomes known whether this person is a male or a female. If the person finds out that his or her spouse is mad or can become mad, then again this is a defect which gives him the right to annul the marriage contract. The same thing can go with leprosy, and that is a skin disease which spreads throughout the skin. As for merely having a patch of whiteness on the skin, then this is something normal that can happen amongst people, and it is not considered as an aib. What we are talking about is proper leprosy which spreads across the skin. What if the woman finds her husband not to be castrated, but he has genitalia which is not sufficient enough to give her pleasure? We say yes, this is certainly an aib, a defect, because the woman has the right to enjoy sexual intercourse. And if the man is not up to the job, so as to speak, then she has the right to annul the marriage contract. So we say if the man finds a defect in his wife, he does not divorce her, rather he annuls the marriage contract, and this is more beneficial for the man, because if he was to divorce the wife, then we know that a divorce will be counted against him. And then after 3 divorces, you're not allowed to marry her again until she consummates marriage with another man. So the point is, if he annuls the marriage contract, then he does not have a divorce counted against him. So it's not like anybody can say you have used up one of your 3 divorces. Second benefit is that if he has given her the mahr, then he can take back the mahr from the person who deceived him. So if the wali of the woman deceived him by not exposing the defect of the woman, then he can take back what he gave to the wife from the wali of the wife. Another benefit in society for this man is that if a man is somebody who divorces his wives often, then he earns his reputation of being somebody who divorces much. And this is a negative reputation for any man to have, somebody who divorces women. This is not a reputation which any man seeks. But if he annuls the marriage contract due to this valid cause, then he will not earn this reputation of being a man who divorces often. As for the woman given the right to annul the contract, then the benefit is clear enough. The woman does not own this issue of divorce, so she cannot divorce her husband. But if she has some valid grounds to annul the marriage contract, then this is a method with which she can free herself of this man. However, we should say about these defects is that if it is possible to remedy these defects within a reasonable period of time, such that you're not taking away the rights of anyone, then this needs to be done, and the other partner does not have the right to annul the marriage contract as long as this defect can be remedied within a reasonable period of time, so that the other partner is not kept waiting. As for madness, then the same rule applies here. If this madness can be cured, then the other partner does not have the right to annul the contract because the defect can be remedied. As for if it cannot be remedied, then he or she does have the choice to annul the marriage contract. What about other types of defects like blindness and deafness and dumbness, so that you cannot speak, or perhaps araj, which is when a person cannot walk properly, or maybe a person may have a missing limb, or something of the like. Some scholars say that no, these types of defects do not give you the choice to annul the marriage contract, and the reason they say this is because they give a list of defects which, if found in a person, gives the right to the other partner to annul the marriage contract, and these defects which we have just mentioned right now are not from their list. So they say that if you find these defects which we have just mentioned right now in a spouse, then you're not allowed to annul the marriage contract. And they say that if you don't want these defects in your spouse, then you should have made a condition that your spouse does not have these conditions. So for example, you should have said to the wali of the woman that yes, I accept this marriage contract on the condition that this woman is not deaf, or she's not blind, or she's not missing a limb, and so on. So you should have made a condition like that. So if you did not make a condition and you find these types of defects in her, then you don't have the right to annul the marriage contract, because these defects are not in our list of defects which give you the right to annul the marriage contract. And this is how they argue. But like we said before, and like what Ibn al-Qayyim has said, is that any defect which the people consider to be a defect in a person gives you the right to annul the marriage contract. So it's any defect which will hinder a relationship between the man and his wife, or some sort of defect which will put off the spouse from the other partner, meaning make him or her averse to his or her partner. We need to bear in mind the intentions and purposes of a marriage. It is that both of these people can live together in happiness and peace and derive pleasure from each other, both emotional pleasure and sexual pleasure. So if we have a defect which interferes with these purposes of marriage, then this is a valid defect, which gives you the right to annul the marriage contract. What about if her age differs? So he marries a woman, he was thinking that she is 25 years old, but she happens to be 35 years old. Is this a defect? Well, as long as he was not duped into thinking that she's 25 years old, and he thought that she's 25 years old and that was just a misjudgment on his part, and she happens to be 35 years old, then this is not a valid defect, because this sort of thing does not interfere in the purposes and intentions of a marriage contract. As for those scholars who give a limited list of the defects, which gives the person the right to annul the marriage contract, they restrict themselves to these particular defects. And when asked, why do you restrict yourself to only these particular defects, they will answer by saying that these are the defects which have been narrated from the Salaf, that they gave the choice to annul the marriage contract because of these particular defects. So if we have a defect which is not from this list, then it is not a valid defect which gives you the right to annul the marriage contract. But we say in response to this that these defects which have been mentioned by the Salaf are just particular defects. It does not mean to say that these are the only defects which give you the right to annul the marriage contract. So we simply use sound analogy and we say that any defects which are similar to these defects or worse than these defects, then they give you the right to annul the marriage contract, and this is sensible enough. Here's another issue though. What happens if the other partner develops a defect after the marriage contract? Because so far we've been discussing a defect which this person has before the marriage contract, and then after the contract the other person finds out about this defect and he was not informed beforehand, or she was not informed beforehand. But what if two people get married who don't have a defect, but afterwards one of them has a defect? Does the other person have a choice to annul the marriage contract? Well, in this case we have to say it depends on what type of defect it is. With some defects, you don't have the right to annul the contract, and it is much like you purchasing a product which does not have a defect, and then after you purchase the product, it develops a defect. Are you allowed to return the product? The answer is no. You're only allowed to return the product if the defect was in place before the sales contract, not afterwards. And so it's the same case with the marriage contract. After it is done, then it is a binding contract. So if a defect develops in the other spouse, then you don't have the right to annul this contract. However, it depends on the defect. So for example, if one of the spouse develops madness, so he or she becomes mad in a way which is irreversible. Now the point is that this could be dangerous on the other partner because a mad person might harm the other partner. He might even kill the other partner. So in a case like this, meaning a defect of this sort, then we would have to say definitely you do have the right to annul the contract because it becomes a matter of safety. What happens if it's the case that both of the partners have a similar type of defect? For example, the man has a defect which prevents him from having intercourse, for example he's castrated, but the woman also has a defect which prevents her from having intercourse, for example her genitalia is completely blocked off. Then in this case we say you don't have a choice to annul the marriage contract because you're not going to benefit in aught. Because it's not like you can choose somebody else so that you can have intercourse with them, because you yourself are unable to have intercourse. If a woman knows that a man has some aib or a defect, but she expresses that she is happy or content with this aib, then some scholars say that afterwards she does not have a choice to annul the marriage contract because she was happy to accept this contract or this proposal. Some scholars say that even if she accepts this defect, then afterwards she still has the right to annul the contract. Because it could be that she has accepted this contract, but she wants time to think about the affair of the man. That does she want to continue with him or not? Other scholars have said that no, she does not have a choice if she knows about the defect and still she accepts it. However, they make an exception with the person who has impotence. They say that she may accept the marriage contract and agree to have intercourse with him, perhaps in the hope that he will be able to have an erection when he comes to doing the act. But we can say that she can get around this problem by making a khiyar al-shart, just as in a sales contract. So they would say that we conclude this contract and we will have, let's say, 1 week to decide whether to continue with this contract or annul it. Remember, we spoke about this issue before, and some scholars say that you cannot have a khiyar al-shart in a nikah contract, because with a nikah contract, much thought and seeking of advice goes in, unlike a sales contract, so therefore you're not allowed to have this khiyar al-shart, neither the khiyar al-majlis. And the other opinion is that you are allowed to have a khiyar al-shart in a marriage contract, because it could be that this man is known to be up to no good or to be somebody of bad character, so the woman wants to reserve this right to annul the marriage contract within, let's say, 1 month or some reasonably specified time period. So the point is, she could do the same here. If she knows the man to be impotent, she could say, okay, I agree to this contract, but within, let's say, 1 week I have the right to annul the marriage contract if this person is not able to have intercourse. What if the man sees some whiteness on the skin of the woman when he's proposing to her, but he does not mind, he is happy with this, and then after the contract it transpires that she actually has leprosy, so this wasn't just a white mark on the skin, rather the issue is far more serious. We say to the man in this case, you don't have a choice to annul the contract, because when you were happy with this whiteness, why did you not inspect the matter more carefully? So because you were happy with the type of defect, which is the whiteness on the skin in this case, then you don't have a choice. Because if you know about the defect and you are happy with it, then you do not have the choice to annul the marriage contract afterwards based on this defect which you were previously happy and content with. So if it comes to the case that one of the two parties wants to annul the marriage contract, then who annuls the contract? We say it is the hakim or the Muslim ruler who annuls the contract. And this is the best and safest way of doing it. Because whatever the hakim or the ruler rules, then everybody is obligated to follow, and there can be no arguments. But what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says is that you only go to the hakim if there is a dispute. As for if both parties agree that they will annul this marriage contract because of a defect which one of the two parties has, then we have no need to go to the hakim. Because the point is that the hakim or the judge is there to resolve disputes. But if we don't have a dispute in the very first place, then there is nothing to resolve, and hence we don't need the judge. If this annulment of the marriage contract takes place before they both entered into privacy with each other, then does the man have to give the mahar or not? We say depends on who has the defect. If the woman has the defect and the man annuls the marriage contract because of this defect, and this happens before they enter into privacy with each other, then the man does not have to give anything. Because remember, this is an annulment, it is not a divorce. If he was to divorce her before entering into privacy, then he has to give her half of the stipulated mahar. But not so when it comes to the annulment of a marriage contract. So we say he has to give her nothing. But what if the defect is found in the man and the woman wants to annul the contract? Some scholars say that she deserves nothing because the contract has been annulled because of her. So she is annulling the contract, so she deserves nothing. But the correct opinion is that actually the contract is being annulled because of the man, because the defect is in the man, not in the woman. And if it wasn't for this defect, then the contract would not be annulled. Therefore, based upon this, because this annulment is because of the man, the woman deserves half of the mahar. As for if they entered into privacy with each other, then the woman deserves the whole mahar, no matter what the situation is. And this idea of when the full mahar is due and when half of the mahar is due is something which we will be discussing in the chapter of the sadaq or the mahar, insha'Allah ta'ala. What about this issue? A woman is mature and she is of sound intellect, and a proposal comes to her from a man who has a defect, and she is happy with this defect and wants to go ahead with this marriage. Does the wali of this woman have the right to prevent her from entering into this contract? We say no, generally he does not, because this woman is baligha, meaning she is an adult, and she is of sound mind, so she can make her choice. But with some defects, we say the wali does have the choice or the right to overrule her decision. For example, if the man is mad and she wants to go ahead with this marriage, the wali can step in and say, hang on a minute, this is not correct, and I will overrule this decision. And the reason for this is because this madness of the man can actually prove to be extremely harmful for the woman. It could even lead to the man killing the woman, because a madman does not know what he's doing. But as for other types of defects, such as impotence or some other kind of illness, if she's happy to go along with it, then the wali does not have the right to interfere. This is as long as the woman is an adult and of sound mind. Similarly, for example, if the man proposing to this woman is somebody who gets drunk and the woman wants to marry him, in this case we say the wali does have the right to step in and overrule the decision, because this man getting drunk is extremely dangerous for the woman, because a drunk man, just like a madman, has lost his senses. So he doesn't actually know what he's doing, and this could potentially be fatal for the woman. So we say this idea of the walaya, or the man being the wali of the woman, is an amana, it is a trust, which basically means this, that the man has to act in a way which is most beneficial for the woman, not most beneficial for himself. So sometimes this does mean that he has to overrule the decision of the woman, and at other times it means that he has to give the woman free rein and allow her to make her choices. So the point is, we don't go to either extremes. We don't say that he gives the woman the right to make a choice absolutely every time, and neither do we say that he overrules every single decision of this woman. No, rather we have to strike a happy middle ground, and we simply say that the wali has to act in a way which is most beneficial for the woman. Similarly, if you are in charge of the wealth of an orphan, you have to act in a way which is most beneficial for the orphan, not most beneficial for you. Or for example, if the man has a type of condition or disease which is infectious, then again the wali can overrule the decision of the woman to go ahead and marry this man. So if the woman says she wants to marry this man who has an infectious disease, which is of a dangerous type, then the wali can overrule this woman. For example, the man may have AIDS, and if this woman makes a decision to marry him, then it is understandable that the wali should step in and overrule this decision, because this condition of the man can affect the woman, and it can also affect the children of this woman. What about if she agrees to marry a man with leprosy? Can the wali overrule her decision? The answer is no in this case. And some scholars have said yes, he can. But it appears that leprosy is just restricted to the man himself, and it is not something which is contagious neither to her nor to her children. But what about this case, that they get married and none of them has a defect, but after the contract the man develops madness? Now we said that the wali can overrule the decision of the woman if she agrees to marry a madman. But now, in this situation, the madness has taken place after the marriage contract, not before. We say in a case like this, the right solely belongs to the woman, whereas before the marriage contract, the right belongs to the woman, but also the wali as well. Otherwise, there really would be no point in having the wali of the woman if he does not have any rights. But after the marriage contract, here's the difference now, after the marriage contract, the right solely belongs to the woman, so now the wali cannot step in and say, well look, this man is now mad, so therefore I'm going to force you to annul this marriage contract. The wali cannot say this. This idea of annulling the marriage contract is solely the right of the woman, not the right of the wali. So notice this difference when a defect occurs before the contract and after the contract, and how this affects the rights of the wali of the woman. So to sum up this idea of defects, we have discussed some important topics. The first topic we discussed is the types of defects that we can have. Things which are specific to the male, things which are specific to the female, and those things which are shared between males and females. And we said that even though these are defects, you can still enter into a marriage contract with the other party if the other party has these defects, if you are happy with it. Except if it be the case of madness or some sort of infectious disease, because then the wali of the woman can overrule the decision of the woman. And we also mentioned the important point as to the question, what is a defect? And we said anything which hinders the purposes and intentions of a marriage contract is a defect which grants you the right to annul the marriage contract. And we said that if these defects appear after the marriage contract, then you don't have the right to annul them, except for the case of madness or some other type of harmful condition which could adversely affect the other party. However, the wali of the woman does not have the right to force the woman to annul the marriage contract in this case. But the woman does have the right to annul the marriage contract. Likewise, the man does have the right to annul the marriage contract if the other party turns mad or develops some harmful infectious disease. Because here, the idea is to save your own self. And we also spoke about this issue of whether the woman receives the mahar or not. So after entering into privacy, she definitely does, but if the annulment is before entering into privacy, then it depends on who has the defect. And on the topic of mahar, let's just discuss one final issue. If the man finds that the woman has a defect, which he did not know about, but he still wants to keep her, but just he wants to reduce the mahar, so he says that because of this defect, I would like to reduce the mahar which I am giving to this woman. So in a case like this, we would say that if this type of woman was free from defect, then what would a type of woman like her receive as a mahar? If this mahar, let's say, is £1,000, And with the defect, a woman of her type would be, let's say, somebody who receives £500 as a mahar. So this is a loss of 1/2. Now if the man, let's say, stipulated that the mahar he's going to give this woman is £800, but now he wants to keep her with the defect, then we say that you can knock off half of this mahar. So now you give her £400. And this is exactly the same way we would deal in the sales transactions. You buy a product and it has a defect, but you still want to keep the product. So the point is you're entitled to an indemnity payment, and this is the way we would work out the indemnity payment by way of the proportion. And this is an issue which we discussed previously in the Kitab al-Bay'. And so this is one opinion on this issue. The other opinion of the scholars is that he does not have this choice. So either he takes this woman as she is and he gives the full mahar which he stipulated, or he annuls the marriage contract entirely.
Okay, let us take some review questions. So question number 1. Defects can be divided up into various categories, but what is the bottom line general rule when it comes to identifying a defect? Question number 2. With respects to stipulating the absence of defects, we divided defects up into 2 categories, each with their respective rule, with regards to being able to stipulate them and having the choice to annul the marriage. Recall these 2 categories along with their respective ruling. Question number 3. What happens if the defect in one of the spouses takes place after the marriage contract? Then does the other spouse have the right to annul? Give the detail on this matter. Question number 4. Can the wali of the woman overrule the woman if she wants to marry a man with a defect? Give the detail here. Question number 5. If the man finds a defect in his wife after the contract and he was unaware of this defect, and yet he does not mind the defect, he wants to keep her, how does this decision of his affect the mahar which he gives the wife? Give the 2 opinions on this matter.